You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast, where we cover all things related to the technical aspects of vertebrate pest management. Hey, glad to have you on board. Hope you had a great week. We're running up into Thanksgiving here next week, so I'm sure many of you are looking at getting with family and friends. This will be publishing, of course, probably after Thanksgiving, but nevertheless, a belated happy Thanksgiving to you. Been a little busy. Things are kind of slowing down a little bit for me, thank goodness. I had some obligations, so I am glad to get those done and out of the way. So I'm getting a little bit of breathing space here, so I'm quite pleased about that, to try to get on to some other projects. So again, how do you get a hold of me? You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you if you have thoughts about the show, if you have topics that you would like to have investigated. Definitely reach out. We'd love to get those ideas. And if you even have criticisms of the show, we'd like to hear those as well. So this week, we're going to talk about something that I saw in an article in Pest magazine. This is my website, of course, if you're looking for training materials. If you want to get me to speak at your particular conference or what have you, you can certainly reach me through my website as well. There's some literature there for you, and some of the things I do for PowerPoint training and ghostwriting and that sort of thing. You can definitely reach out to me for those types of services. All right, well, let me get my slideshow up here. And okay, well, there we go. All right, so I'm getting organized here eventually. All right. So I saw an article in Pest magazine, and I thought I would summarize some of this material, because I was really, I just thought it was awesome that the person did the work on this. I guess he worked for BASF and wrote an article for Pest magazine. If you're not familiar with Pest magazine is published in the United Kingdom. It's in a digital format, so you can certainly go over there and subscribe. And so sometimes it's interesting to see how rodent control and pest control is done over in Europe, for example. And so it's a different regulatory environment, a different habitat, kind of. I mean, not dramatically so, but it's different culture, regulations, and different techniques that they employ, and just different challenges. And I think there's a lot we can learn from them. And so I subscribed to the magazine and came across this article, which I was really glad, because I just thought it had information that was really quite helpful. And the question was, how long does Selontra is a brand name now. It's a brand name for a particular rodenticide that uses cholecalciferol. So cholecalciferol, of course, you may know it as vitamin D3, and so it causes calcification in rodents. So it's a non-anticoagulant bait, and it appears to have some benefits in the fact that it is a safer. I'm not calling cholecalciferol safe. I'll be very clear about that. It has elements that make it safer than some of the anticoagulant type baits that are on there. Particularly, I would suspect, the second generation anticoagulants, because it has a stop feed mechanism. So it's relatively fast acting. And it's relatively palatable, I guess, as well. Of course, we're getting this information from the manufacturer, but I have no reason to doubt them per se. And so the question came up, I guess, was how long does the bait last, right? Because it comes in sort of a plastic wrapped form. And, of course, people are wondering, when they have it out in their bait stations, how long does it last? Does it kind of go stale, right? And that's a question, because rodents, like us, we like fresh food, right? So here are some of the questions that come up with it. And so how long will the bait last, right? So is there any measurable reduction in the active ingredients? So over time, and this was a question I sometimes get from people, is they'll say, like, what's the shelf life of a particular rodenticide? And they're looking at it in the sense they think it's going to reduce over time the toxicity of it. And so typically in what I've read and what I've seen, typically rodenticides don't become less toxic. The part that goes bad is the formulation. So you may recall that when we're looking at a rodenticide bait that you would purchase to use on mice and rats, for example, you have the poison part of the bait, and you have the food ingredient that makes the bait attractive to the rodent. And so what typically goes bad in a bait is the formulation, that is the food ingredients that are used to entice the rodent to eat. Often the active ingredient doesn't degrade. Now there are going to be some exceptions to that, to be sure, but nevertheless, typically the active ingredient, the part that makes it poisonous, is not degrading, right? So, but anyways, they wanted to ask this particular question. And of course, the big one, is there any measurable reduction in palatability? That is, does it still taste good to the rodent over time? Or does it kind of get stale, right? So we're looking at some, grain baits, for example. If they're not stored well and they're stored for too long of a period of time, they tend to dry out. And what rodent wants to eat dry grain? Well, you say, well, it's already dry. Well, we're talking about like bone dry, like cookie crisper dry, right? So that's way too dry. And then, is there any reduction in efficacy on rodents? Of course, all of that would be related to, is there a reduction in the active ingredient, and is there a reduction in palatability? And so those are the three primary research questions that the article was addressing. So if you're wondering who wrote it, his last name was King, and it was published in 2025, this year. And the title of the article was How Long Can Bait Last? And of course, he's only looking at this particular product, and that's Selontra. I should have a registered mark on there, but it's a brand name produced by BASF, and it is available here in the United States. I just saw a presentation about it by Sylvia Kenmure, who I will always adore because she helped me get my ACE. And so she gave a presentation that I was able to watch the other day. So it is available here, and it also has a pre-Lontra, which is a non-toxic monitoring bait, which is associated with Selontra. So pre-Lontra is non-toxic. It's a monitoring bait. Not going to talk about that today. And then there's Selontra, which is the toxic bait with the active ingredient vitamin D3. Okay. Now, how long does the product last in the bucket? Well, if you're keeping it in a cool, dry, out of sunlight location, as you should, typically with your rodenticides, you should keep them out of sunlight. The temperature changes should not be dramatic. It should be cool, not cold, but cool, 50s, 60s. I'm not sure I'd go lower than 50s. But in keeping it sealed, you haven't reopened it, right? Because once you open it, it's not the seal's not quite the same. Will it last on the shelf, just untouched, for 5 years in ideal conditions, right? And believe it or not, pre-Lontra, that's the non-toxic bait, will also have a shelf life of 5 years. So I was quite impressed with that. So nevertheless, so that's good news. So if you buy a bunch of it and don't use it right away, as long as you store it well, it's going to be good for 5 years. And so that is quite... That's a positive note. So that's pretty cool. Now, where they tested, in other words, this Mr. King tested this he was in the UK, of course, that's the United Kingdom. He did his testing between October and January. So he did 4 months in the field under field conditions. So how is the UK environment? Well, it tends to be cloudy. It can get kind of cold. A lot of rain in England. And so it's kind of a dampish, a dampish location, a lot of moisture in the UK, but it doesn't get a lot of the freezing cold temperatures that you would get, here that we would have here in Montana, for example. But it gets cold and it's wet. And so those are two things that, certainly the wetness is not something that's often good for longevity of rodenticides because you're degrading the formulation. But nevertheless, that's where he was testing it. So definitely keep that in mind. And so what happened? So after 4 weeks, I wish I could show you the photos, but I don't have rights to them. But nevertheless, just kind of give you some ideas of what he came up with. So after 4 weeks, the bait starts to develop what's called a white patina. And so this is where it starts looking like it's getting a little gray. And that is called blooming. And so blooming occurs when the sugars inside the formulation, because there's sugar, you want to make it palatable for rodents, right? They like to taste good things just like we do, right? So the sugars begin to migrate to the surface of the bait, and that's what causes the whiteness. Just like we have white sugar, that whiteness begins to start forming on the exterior of the bait. However, the sugar remains attractive. So after 4 weeks, everything's still good. It just looks different, but there seems to be no difference in taste as far as the rodents are concerned. So don't rely on your eyes telling you, oh, it's something wrong with my bait. No, there's nothing wrong with your bait. It's just a little change, a physical change that's occurring with the bait. It's not affecting its efficacy or its attractiveness to rodents, okay? So that's 4 weeks, 4 weeks in the bait station, okay? Now, stage 2 is between 8 weeks and 16 weeks. And this is where, now that you have the sugars exposed on the surface of the bait, mold begins to develop. Now, that certainly makes sense because the UK, as I said, was kind of wet, right? So it's a lot of moisture in the UK. And so that makes kind of sense. And then he points out that the white begins to turn gray to black, and that's probably because of the presence of the mold. Now, the million-dollar question, of course, is, does that change the palatability or the attractiveness of the bait to rodents? In other words, is it still palatable, and are rodents still interested in the bait after that those sugars begin to turn moldy and the bait turns gray to black? That's the question. And his answer was, yes, the rodents are still interested. Again, so don't believe your eyes, in the sense, all right, don't be deceived by your eyes. He says it's still attractive in that 8 to 16 week period. Now, is there any loss of toxicity? In other words, so the rodents may still be interested in it, but are they getting the toxic dose? And their testing showed there's essentially no loss of the cholecalciferol. That is the active ingredient of Selontra. So it's still attractive to rodents, even though the bait looks ugly to us. And so his point is you don't have to swap it out. So that makes a cost savings for you. Like you look at your bait and you're like, oh, it's looking kind of nasty, and it's kind of got some mold on it now, and it has this white crust on it. And he's like, you don't have to change it. It's still attractive to the rodents, it's still palatable, and it will still kill them. So that is a cost savings. So that is huge. Now, I want to be clear about this. We're not talking about any other bait here. It would be awesome if we could see other bait manufacturers do this same type of field work, right? And so now, ideally, it would have to be done in different parts of the country because we have different environmental conditions within the United States, just like there is in the UK. But UK is a much smaller country compared to the United States, right? But nevertheless, I'm really glad that they did this, because at least it gives us kind of a baseline in a cool humid environment that is characteristic of the UK. And humid meaning it's wet, right? There's a lot of moisture in the UK because there's a lot of rain there. Not humid in the sense of like New Orleans type humid, although they have a lot of rain, but there's the heat factor in there as well. But they don't have the kind of heat in UK that they would have in New Orleans, obviously. So there's some slight differences there. But nevertheless, after 16 weeks, 4 months, it's still effective, still attractive. Okay, so you don't have to swap out your bait as far as Selontra is concerned. So what do we take away from this? Well, I'm going to encourage you to sort of do your, if you're interested in using Selontra, I'm not here to shill for Selontra that you should use it or not. I'm just simply summarizing information from this particular article. So if you're looking to use Selontra or a vitamin D product in your rodent control, and it is a good idea to keep in mind if you're using anticoagulants for a long-standing time, you need to have a backup to sort of come in and make sure you're not encouraging rodenticide resistance, anticoagulant resistance, because of the constant use of the same active ingredient, right? So you want to be sure you're having a non-anticoagulant in your toolbox, whether that's vitamin D or bromethylene or zinc phosphate. I'm not here to tell you what to use here. I'm just wanting you to be thinking about that if you're going to use Selontra, and you're in a humid and like maybe a New England type environment, or perhaps maybe the mid-Atlantic states might be an issue, that, it's going to last longer than you think. It's nothing else. If you start seeing that patina, don't worry about it, right? So just let it go. But always make sure you want to ground truth the situation in your part of the world, right? Because the environmental conditions are going to be different throughout the world. It's certainly going to be different in America. So, take this information, use it as a benchmark, and make sure that it's true for your environment, right? So I don't want you to think, King was lying to us because it was different in my area. No, I'm saying is that maybe your environmental conditions did something different than what the environmental conditions he had in the UK, right? My suspicion is it probably won't be a problem, but I don't know that, right? You don't know until you find out. But I'm really excited I'm really glad that he did this and that his company allowed him to do. I'm assuming he got permission from his company to do this, because I think it's such important information, and it is nice to know that, at least as far as the UK is concerned, you don't have to swap your bait out after 4 months, which is a great cost savings, I think. So now my question, of course, is not only should you check it in your own neck of the woods, right? But you should also ask the question, now the question is does that mean the product lasts longer when it's indoors? Right? Now, some of you may not use rodenticides inside of your client's house. I mean, those are some business decisions. But would it last longer in a bait station inside of a structure? Maybe it's in an outbuilding, right? Still indoors, not exposed to the elements as much because of the protection of the building. But would it last even longer? Would the patina take longer to come to the surface? I don't know, but it's something that you would want to maybe check out, and would love to hear from you if you have your own experiences with Selontra, which again is vitamin D. So, well, that's it. I just wanted to kind of give you a summary of that particular article because I thought it was so cool, that kind of really hardcore, practical, ground truth information that we got from Mr. King, and I'm really glad that he did it, and want to give him a shout out, and of course to Pest magazine for publishing that article as well. So, well, that's it for me this week. Kind of a short podcast for you, but something I hope you'll find certainly actionable. Again, if you want to reach out to me, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, and of course you can visit my website, look at some of the research, some of the training materials that we have there, and of course if you want me to speak, do a training for your company, or do some ghostwriting, or perhaps work on your PowerPoint that you're going to be giving at a training event, I would definitely love to hear from you. So until next time, take care, everybody. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast, Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and/or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.